I ironed my blouse twice, adjusted my lipstick 3 times, and told myself not to cry, no matter what happened. It was just a dinner, just a family meal, just the people I had loved and raised for over 40 years. But something felt off, like I was being invited as a formality, not as their mother, not as a person. The gathering was at Blake's house, the big glass one with the landscaped yard and wide driveway, bought with the mortgage I co-signed with my husband Henry. No one mentions that anymore. Blake poured wine like he was hosting some upscale vineyard tasting, and Candace, in her gold heels and designer perfume, hovered around the kitchen like it was hers. Maybe it was in her mind. I brought a blueberry pie, Henry's favorite. He always said it was my best. I thought it might warm the mood, but when I walked in, no one looked up. No greetings, no smiles. Their oldest son, Jack, gave me a short nod, the kind reserved for a stranger at a funeral. I placed the pie on the counter, still warm, still hopeful. 9 of us sat down around the table, the same one I gifted them last Christmas. A little too symbolic now. Blake cleared his throat. "We've been thinking it's best if we simplify things," he said, swirling his wine. I already knew what that meant. I asked gently, "Have you talked to the lawyer about the trust?" Candace didn't even look up from her phone. "You're just the widow, Eleanor," she muttered. "Maybe just stay quiet for now." Laughter rippled through the room, not loud, not joyful, just cruel. Trevor, my younger son, chuckled like a sidekick in a bad sitcom. My hands trembled under the table, not from weakness, but from rage, from heartbreak. I realized in that moment that I wasn't one of them anymore. I was an obstacle to be removed. I looked at each of their faces, cold, dismissive, like I was invisible, like I was just an old lady clinging to what wasn't hers. So I stood up. I didn't say a word. No dramatic speech, no tears. I left the pie untouched on the counter, the only gesture of kindness in a room that no longer had any. I walked out the door and didn't look back. They didn't call after me. They didn't care. But they would. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in Henry's old recliner, the one we used to fight over during movie nights, the one with the coffee stain he never noticed. The house was silent, but in that silence, I heard every word they said again. "You're just the widow. Stay quiet." Around 2:30 a.m., I got up and walked barefoot across the hall to the cabinet, the one we always called the no-go drawer. Inside were documents, old passports, tax records, house titles, insurance forms. And then I saw it. A thick white envelope, labeled in Henry's handwriting, Eleanor. I stared at it like it might vanish. Henry was never the sentimental type. He showed love through actions, checking tires, fixing the gutters, not words. But this time he had written. I opened it with shaking hands. One letter, and behind it legal documents. The letter read, "If you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I wanted to tell you earlier, but I knew you'd try to fix it instead of protect yourself. The boys, they're selfish. And Candace, worse. I saw it happening the moment I got sick, so I made changes. Everything is in your name now. House, accounts, lake property, full authority, power of attorney. They don't know. Don't let them shame you. If they ever try to take what's yours, burn it down." Tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, but from clarity. He had seen this coming. He had protected me. Everything was mine. I made tea I didn't drink. My hands shook not from age, but from power I didn't know I had. At 3:47 a.m., I picked up the phone and called Alan Kramer, our family lawyer for over 30 years. "Henry left everything to me," I said. "I found the paperwork. I want to activate it today." He didn't hesitate. "I'll be there at 9. I hung up and walked to the hallway. I looked at our wedding photo, me and Henry on the courthouse steps, young and scared, but together. I touched the frame and whispered, "You can rest now. I've got it." I folded the documents, slid them into a folder, and put it in my purse like it was a weapon. Because that's exactly what it was. By the time the sun rose, I was dressed. Hair pinned up the way Henry liked it, a navy blouse buttoned neatly, and a fresh sense of resolve humming beneath my skin. The documents were laid out across the dining table like a war map next to a steaming mug of untouched coffee. I didn't drink it. I just needed something warm to hold while I waited. At 8:57 a.m., the doorbell rang. Alan Kramer stood there, briefcase in hand, that same old leather folder he had carried since our boys were in grade school, tucked beneath his arm. When I showed him the envelope Henry had left, his expression shifted from polite concern to grim respect. We sat down together side by side, like old co-conspirators. For 2 hours we reviewed every clause, every asset transfer, every term Henry had modified 8 months before his death. Alan's brow furrowed deeper with each paragraph. By 11:15 a.m., I had signed 6 documents. Each signature was like reclaiming a piece of myself. When Alan called the estate manager and gave verbal confirmation that from this moment forward, all decisions and instructions were to come from me, not Blake, not Trevor, not even the family trust. I didn't breathe for a whole minute. All further authorization rests solely with Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, Alan said calmly. The words echoed through the room like a hymn. Then he looked at me and asked, "Do you want to tell them yourself, or let them find out?" I thought for a moment and replied, "Let them feel it. Let it hit like a car crash." Alan smiled. That's the Eleanor I remember. The rest of the day I moved like a ghost through an old battlefield. Phone calls, confirmations, brokerage accounts, title deeds, bank passwords. One by one, everything shifted into my name. Everything they had dismissed as mom stuff became a fortress they no longer held the keys to. At 3:08 p.m., I received a text from Blake Hayward. Question: "Do you know why the cabin account is locked?" I didn't respond. 5 minutes later, Candace called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was sugary smooth but sharp underneath her usual manipulation tone. At 4:30 p.m., the group chat lit up with messages. "The brokerage login isn't working. Who changed the password on the house fund? Did someone freeze the trust Trevor, usually the quiet one, sent? Did someone change access on Mom's end?" That one made me smile. They were finally starting to feel it. I waited until 5:05 p.m., just enough time for them to all gather at Blake's for their strategy dinner. I walked up the path, folder in hand, knocked on the door like I was bringing over a casserole. Blake opened it, confused, irritated, that fake grin of his already slipping. I walked in, placed the folder on the counter, and said, "You all might want to sit down." Of course they didn't. Candace leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Trevor hovered in the hallway. I opened the folder and spread out the documents. "This is the new estate structure," I said. "Everything is in my name. All of it." Silence. That arrogant kind, the kind that still thinks it can outwit you. Blake laughed. "You can't just change everything. The trust has a board." "There is no trust board," I replied coldly. "Henry dissolved it last year." "You didn't read the fine print?" Candace stepped forward, trying to scan the page. "This isn't legal." I slid the notarized copy across the counter. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a notification. As of this morning, you have no legal claim. No one moved, no one breathed." It was the first time in years that I had stood in that room and felt taller than all of them. As I reached the door, I said softly, "Next time you want to discuss my future, you'll need an appointment." I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back, But I knew they finally understood their mother was no longer a background character. That night, I made myself dinner for one. Not out of sadness, but out of reclamation. Roasted chicken garlic, mashed potatoes, green beans with lemon. For once, I wasn't eating scraps while others feasted on my sacrifices. I poured a glass of red wine, sat down in silence, and tasted freedom for the first time in years. Just as I took my first bite, the landline rang. I let it ring twice before answering. Grandma Ava's voice was soft, uncertain. It was Blake and Candace's 17-year-old daughter, the only one in that entire house who ever made eye contact with me at family dinners. "I don't know what's going on," she whispered, "but Mom and Dad are freaking out. They said something about the money and the house. Are you okay?" That question hit harder than anything. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said gently. "You haven't done anything wrong." "I miss Grandpa," she whispered. "He would have hated this." My throat tightened. "That's why he fixed it before it broke," I replied. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by silence. But it wasn't hollow anymore. It felt like clarity. Henry had seen it coming, the greed, the entitlement, the scrambling. He had put the tools in my hand, and now they were flailing without a net. By the next morning, the unraveling had begun. 5 missed calls from Blake, 3 from Candace. Even Trevor tried once, his name blinking on the caller ID before disappearing. I ignored them all. At 9:12 a.m., Blake sent another message. "Can we just talk?" That told me everything. The bravado was gone. He was confused, not angry, afraid. At noon, Alan called. Blake tried to access 2 accounts this morning using his business laptop, he said. Both attempts were flagged and blocked. "Good," I replied. "Let him keep digging." At 1:43 p.m., Candace showed up at my door unannounced. She wore oversized sunglasses as if I wouldn't recognize her face, and carried herself like she was bringing bad news to a neighbor. "Eleanor," she said, fake smile trembling. "We're all a little confused here. Why would Henry do this behind everyone's back?" I looked her dead in the eyes. "Maybe because he knew exactly what you do in front of it." She flinched visibly. "You should leave," I added. "This is trespassing." She tried a vague legal threat, but I shut the door in her face before she could finish. 10 minutes later, Trevor called. His voice was low, cautious, like he didn't want his wife to hear. "I didn't know any of this," he said. "I thought the trust would be automatic. I didn't know Blake and Candace were trying to take over." I paused, then said, "You had every chance to ask me directly. You didn't. That silence, that was your signature." He didn't argue. Just hung up. That evening, I started reviewing every document I had. Tax returns, partnership contracts, business ledgers. I wasn't just going to hold ground. I was going to trace every foul move they made. By nightfall, I had 3 folders labeled legal, strategic, firewood. The last one, that was where I stored proof of betrayal, the papers that could burn what was left of their reputations. And I wasn't done yet. Three days later, they invited me to the family barbecue, like nothing had happened, like we hadn't flipped the family tree upside down and watched the rotten branches fall. My first instinct was to ignore it. Let them sit in their chaos, chewing on lies with grilled burgers and forced smiles. But then I realized sometimes silence is mistaken for surrender. So I showed up, wearing the pearl earrings Henry gave me for our 30th anniversary, and holding a bottle of wine they could no longer afford. The backyard looked staged, plastic tablecloths, fake laughter, Candace wearing white like she was auditioning for forgiveness. Blake manning the grill like the proud provider he was never meant to be. Trevor gave me a nod, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was relieved or ashamed. I didn't wait. I walked straight to the picnic table and dropped a manila folder onto the center. "We need to talk," I said flatly. Candace rolled her eyes. Blake mumbled something under his breath. Trevor cracked open a beer like a scared teenager trying to avoid a fight. I opened the folder. Inside loan fraud. Forged signatures, unauthorized withdrawals. All Blake, all documented, all notarized. "This," I said, "is what Blake did while your father was dying." Silence. Real silence. Blake scoffed. "This is ridiculous." I cut him off, sliding a notarized document across the table. "It's not a guess. It's confirmed. And the only reason you're not in jail is because I'm giving you one last chance to own it." Candace stepped forward, voice shrill. "This is a setup Henry would have told us." I turned to her slowly. "Henry saw it. He just didn't trust you to fix it." That shut her up. Even Ava, who had been sitting quietly near the fence, looked stunned. I turned back to Blake. "You'll start signing things over today. The vehicles, the cabin, the business inventory. You don't get to enjoy what you tried to destroy." Blake's jaw clenched. "You're going to burn the whole family down over paperwork." I stepped forward, low and steady. "No. You did that when you stole from your father's grave." And I walked away. As I reached the gate, I heard Candace hiss, "You're just a bitter old woman." I didn't turn around. I just said calmly, "No. I'm the woman who paid for this yard, and I just decided you're not welcome in it anymore." That night I sat on the porch drinking the wine I brought. I watched the sun set through the trees, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was surviving. I was leading. The following Monday, I met with the real estate attorney. I wore navy slacks and Henry's favorite brooch, an old silver rose with a cracked stem, a quiet symbol of strength that has been broken but never discarded. We sat at the polished table across from each other. I handed over a list of properties that Henry and I still owned. The lake house Blake bragged about on Instagram. The downtown condo Trevor had been renting under the table. Even the SUV Candace used to drive Ava to school and leased under Henry's name. "Do you want to notify them personally?" the attorney asked. I smiled faintly. "No. They didn't invite me into the room when they were planning to divide my life. I'm not giving them a stage now." That week, I signed sale orders for every one of those assets. One by one. No emotion. Just clean, deliberate signatures. Each one removing them from the kingdom they thought they inherited. By Friday, Blake's business account had been drained of illegally secured funds. Candace's credit card was declined at a Westport boutique. Trevor called in a panic after receiving a lease termination notice from the building manager. I answered that one. "Yes," I said calmly. "And the next tenant will pay rent, like everyone else." That afternoon, Candace came unhinged. She showed up at my front steps, red-faced and screaming about lawyers and injustice, and how I was ruining the family. I didn't open the door. I just stood behind the curtain blinds, slightly parted, and watched her unravel. She eventually left heels, scraping furiously across the pavement. The next day, I had the locks changed at the cabin. The day after that, the SUV was repossessed. While Blake was at brunch, his neighbors whispering behind hedges as the tow truck backed in. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was reclaiming what was mine. What Henry and I built brick by brick, while everyone else stood waiting for their share. That evening, Ava texted me, "Dad is losing it. They're talking about moving in with Aunt Brenda." "Is this permanent?" I stared at her message, then replied, "Actions are permanent. So are consequences." She didn't respond immediately. I saw the typing bubble appear, then disappear. I understood. She was caught between truth and loyalty, trying to balance what she'd been told her whole life against what she was now watching unfold in real time. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no dread, just peace. It began with a phone call from Alan. "There's something you need to see," he said. An hour later, I was sitting in his office. Same chipped mug, same faint smell of legal paper and old carpet. Alan slid a folder across the desk. These were pulled from the company's archived records. I opened it slowly. Bank statements, wire transfers, collateral loan documents. Every single page had Blake's name. "He used your husband's business line of credit," Alan said, as collateral for private purchases. "How much?" I whispered. "Over $500,000. "That's just what we've confirmed." My throat tightened. And when Alan didn't flinch. The first transaction happened 2 weeks after Henry's first surgery. I flipped through the pages again. Blake's signature, loan approvals, payment to a renovation contractor, a luxury SUV lease, ski resort charges. He'd used company credit signed as a partner, even though the partnership legally dissolved the moment Henry passed, which makes it fraud. Alan confirmed. Potentially criminal. I felt sick. He did this while we were still hoping Henry would recover, while I was cooking soup and waiting outside scan rooms. Alan nodded. I don't say this lightly, but yes. He knew Henry wouldn't survive, so he started cashing in before the will was cold. I sat in silence for a long time. Then I asked, "Do we press charges?" Week, and Alan said. But sometimes letting someone twist in financial knots does more damage than a courtroom. I stood heart pounding. "Let him sweat," I said. "Let him know the ground under him is gone." That night, I pulled out Henry's old leather journal, the one he kept behind the tax files. Tucked between notes on expenses and dry cleaning receipts, I found a line in his handwriting: Blake's withdrawals. "Looks fishy. Ask Alan." He had known. He hadn't gotten to stop it. But now I would. Ort. Two days later, an envelope slid under my front door. No return address. Just my name, Eleanor Whitmore, scrawled in shaky handwriting. At first I thought it might be from Ava. A handwritten note, an apology, maybe even a thank you. But when I opened it, a chill ran through my spine. It was a psychiatric recommendation form, not signed, but highlighted in red were the words "Capacity Evaluation Recommended." I knew exactly what it was. Candace, or someone acting on her behalf, was attempting to challenge my legal control of the estate. Their strategy, claiming I was mentally unfit. I had seen enough legal paperwork in Henry's lifetime to spot a trap when I saw one. That afternoon, I drove straight to Alan's office. He scanned the document, his brow furrowed deeply. "This is bold," he muttered. I nodded. "Trace it. I want names. I want who submitted it, who signed it, who printed it." 2 days later, Alan called back. It was Candace. She approached a notary who owed her a favor, tried to backdate the evaluation. "We have the emails." One of the assistant paralegals flipped, gave a full statement in exchange for immunity. I didn't hesitate. Press charges. They're already in motion. That evening, a county sheriff's car pulled up to Blake and Candace's home right as they were unloading groceries. The neighborhood watched like it was a live show. Candace screamed, flailed, sobbed, but none of it stopped the officer from cuffing her on the sidewalk. Forgery, attempted fraud, abuse of process. Blake tried to intervene. The deputy stepped in and placed a firm hand on his chest. I wasn't there. But Ava called me after. She tried to say it was your fault, Ava whispered. But even Dad didn't believe her. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just told Ava, some people don't break. They rot. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at Henry's photo. The one from our 30th anniversary, the courthouse steps. His tie slightly crooked, my hand resting on his chest. We looked so sure of each other, and in a way, we were. But nothing had prepared me for fighting this battle without him. And yet here I was. One woman against 3 generations of entitled expectations, and I was winning. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a burial. One by one, I had taken back everything Blake, Candace, and Trevor tried to steal. Their houses, cars, access, business leverage. Their comfort zones were gone. I had erased their illusion of control. But it didn't bring me joy, because power without purpose is just noise. That day I called Peter, the estate's accountant. I want to transfer one of the properties, I said. The small yellow house outside town. The one with the porch swing. Henry always said it reminded him of his grandmother's. To whom Peter asked, Ava. There was a pause. She's still in high school, isn't she? She's the only one in that family who didn't lie to me. She didn't take sides. She looked me in the eye when no one else did. Peter nodded slowly on the line. Understood. I didn't tell her at first. I wanted the papers to be finalized. I didn't want it to seem like a bribe or a sympathy gift. When the transfer was complete, I wrote her a short letter. Ava, this is not a reward. It's a recognition. You were the only one who saw me, who didn't turn away. This house is yours now, not because of what you've done, but because of what you chose not to do. Love, Grandma Eleanor. The day she received it, I saw her bike outside the gate. She stood on the porch holding the envelope with trembling hands. She didn't knock. She just waited. I stepped outside. She looked up, eyes glossy. You gave me a house, I gave you a place, I said. Something no one can take from you. She burst into tears. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, overwhelming disbelief. I didn't do anything to deserve this, she whispered. You did, I said, because you didn't pretend. Three weeks passed. Not a call, not a knock. The silence was the loudest it had ever been, and strangely that was when I felt the shift. For the first time since Henry died, the house felt like mine, not just in the legal sense, but in spirit. The air no longer carried resentment. The walls didn't echo with memories turned sour. I could breathe without holding back tears. I redecorated the guest room, donated half the dining room chairs, started planting lavender in the backyard where Henry once dreamed of a herb garden. Every act was small, but together they whispered something new. You're not surviving anymore. You're living. And then one morning a letter arrived, hand-delivered. No return address, just 3 words on the envelope. I'm sorry. Trevor inside a single-page apology. No excuses, no manipulation. Just the truth. He wrote about how he let fear dictate his silence, how he had seen the warning signs but chose comfort over confrontation, and how he didn't deserve forgiveness but hoped someday he might earn it. I didn't cry, not because it didn't move me, but because it didn't ask me to. 2 days later, I invited him for tea. Not to patch things up, not to start over, just to sit, to let the silence between us mend rather than punish. When he arrived, I poured 2 cups of chamomile. He didn't speak much. Neither did I. But halfway through the second cup, he looked up and said, "Thank you for not shutting the door." I didn't answer directly, just reached into the drawer and handed him a photo. Henry holding baby Trevor in the hospital room. He'd want better from you, I said. And so do I. He nodded, and for the first time in years, his eyes looked like the boy I once raised. It was a Sunday morning. Cool breeze rustling leaves, a mug of tea warming my palms. I sat on the front porch with a blank page in front of me. For weeks now, I'd handled documents, confrontations, fraud, and fire. But this time, the paper was different. It wasn't about protecting the past. It wasn't about reclaiming property or dignity. It was about legacy. Not just what I would leave behind in deeds and bank accounts, but in hearts and minds. So I began to write. To those who will find this after I'm gone. I didn't plan to die soon. But I knew that real strength came not from how we fought in chaos, but how we guided others beyond it. I wrote of Henry, of how he didn't wear his heart on his sleeve, but in the way he filled up my gas tank every Saturday, or brought home my favorite peach jam when I didn't ask. I wrote of the boys of the joy, the betrayal, the slow erosion of trust. But mostly I wrote about Eleanor, a woman who had been dismissed, underestimated, and mocked. A woman who once tiptoed through her own life, afraid of being too much. A woman who, after losing the love of her life, found herself not in grief, but in power. When I finished, I sealed the letter and placed it in the back of Henry's leather journal. It belonged there, next to history, and proof, and quiet bravery. That afternoon, I drove to the lake house one last time. It was empty now, echoing and dust-touched. I walked through each room with care, saying goodbye, not to the objects, but to who I had once been in them. In the kitchen, I whispered thanks for the evenings filled with laughter. In the bedroom, I laid a hand on the headboard and said, "You kept me strong." In the study, I left behind a pressed sprig of lavender. As the sun set, I locked the door behind me, slid the keys into an envelope, and dropped them in the mailbox addressed to the next owner. Then I drove not back home, but to the yellow house, Ava's house. She was there painting the front porch railing white. She turned as I pulled up, her face lit with a surprised smile. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. I smiled. I didn't either. We sat on the swing Henry once dreamed of. The wood creaked gently beneath us. "I want to give you something else," I said. She looked wary. "You've given me enough. This isn't a thing. It's a truth." I placed my hand on hers. "Never let someone else decide what you deserve. Not a man, not a family, not even your own fear." She nodded slowly, tears forming. I continued. I made the mistake of waiting too long to speak, of letting silence steal decades. "You don't have to." Ava leaned her head against my shoulder. "I won't," she whispered. We sat there until the sun melted into the trees. When I left, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I had passed something forward. That night, I returned home, made myself a small dinner, and opened the window so I could hear the wind. Before bed, I stood at the mirror not to fix my hair or check my skin, but to look at the woman who refused to fade. And for once I said aloud, "You did good, Eleanor," and I believed it. If you've made it this far, thank you. Not just for watching, but for feeling. For walking alongside Eleanor through heartbreak, injustice, silence, and finally power. This story isn't just about a woman standing up to her own children. It's about every person who has ever been dismissed, every voice that was told to stay quiet, every heart that gave too much and was left with too little. Eleanor didn't choose revenge. She chose truth. She chose to break the cycle so that the next generation, like Ava, could rise with dignity, not debt. So if you're watching this and you feel invisible, unappreciated, or underestimated, let this be your reminder. You are not alone, and it is never too late to take your story back. From ashes we rise, from silence we speak, and from the end, we begin again. Thank you for being part of Eleanor's journey, and maybe in some way your own.